Saving Home. Chapter 4. Joe's apartment was nothing like Kate's. Where hers was a study in beige minimalism and curated silence, Joe's living space felt lived in, a chaotic embrace of dark leather and exposed brick. Kate stood in the foyer, her arms wrapped around her midsection. The adrenaline that had fueled her through the police report was evaporating, leaving behind a tremor in her bones. She stared at the floorboards, unable to look up and unable to process that she was standing in a stranger's home because her own fortress had been breached. "I can't stay," she whispered. "I have things. I have shifts." Joe locked the deadbolt. He turned, his movements slow and deliberate, keeping his distance as if she were a startled deer. "You're not going back there tonight, Kate. The police took the guy away, but your door jamb is splintered." He pointed toward a hallway to the left. "My guest room is down there. It has fresh sheets, and the lock on the door works from the inside. I don't want to impose. You're not." He walked past her into the kitchen, opening a cabinet. "And you're shaking so hard I can hear your teeth rattling." Kate clamped her jaw shut. He was right. The tremor had started in her hands and worked its way inward until her core felt like a tuning fork struck against granite. "Water," Joe said, placing a glass on the counter. "Drink, then sleep." Kate approached the glass. She lifted it, but her hand betrayed her, the water sloshing over the rim. Joe didn't say a word. He didn't reach out to steady her, sensing she would shatter if he made contact. Instead, he grabbed a roll of paper towels and set it nearby. "Guest room," he repeated, his voice carrying that low, immovable authority. "I've got an early practice. You probably won't even see me in the morning." Kate nodded, the fight draining out of her. She walked down the hallway he'd indicated. The guest room was a shock. She had expected a sparseness like the living room, baseball memorabilia perhaps, or just empty furniture. Instead, the room was an explosion of color. The walls were cream, but they were plastered with framed artwork that clearly belonged to a child. Crayon masterpieces of lopsided houses, finger-painted flowers, and stick figures playing baseball under suns that wore sunglasses. A large framed sheet of construction paper sat on the dresser. In wobbly green marker it read, "Uncle Joe is the best catcher in the universe." The E at the end of universe was missing. The duvet was thick and soft, a mismatched plaid that clashed with the rug. A bookshelf in the corner was crammed with eclectic titles, everything from The Art of War to Harry Potter. It was warm, safe, and completely disarming. Kate sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at the stick figure drawing of Joe, distinguishable by the catcher's gear, and felt the first hot tear track down her cheek. She wiped it away angrily. She pulled her phone from her pocket. Her thumb hovered over the contact for Dr. Thorne. Calling out was professional suicide. It was weakness, an admission that chaos had won. She touched her throat. It was tender, the skin likely already turning purple where Todd's forearm had crushed her windpipe. If she went in, they'd see. The nurses would whisper, and the residents would look at her with pity. She hit the call button. "Thorne," the chief of surgery answered on the second ring, his voice gruff with sleep. "It's McCormick," she said. Her voice was raspy, foreign to her own ears. "Kate? It's 1 a.m. Did the Bradley kid crash again?" "No, the Bradley kid is stable." She took a breath, staring at the drawing of the sunglass-wearing son. "I need 48 hours, Eris." Silence stretched on the line. Kate McCormick didn't take sick days. She didn't take mental health days. She worked through the flu, through holidays, through exhaustion. "Is everything all right?" Thorne's tone shifted from annoyed to sharp. "I had an incident, and I'm incapacitated." She used the clinical term as a shield. "I cannot perform at standard." "Okay," Thorne said slowly. "Okay. Take 48 hours. Do you need me to? I'll update you regarding my schedule on Sunday." She ended the call before he could ask questions she wasn't prepared to answer. The phone clattered onto the nightstand. Kate curled onto the plaid duvet, fully clothed, huddled into a ball. She looked at the door with the sturdy lock Joe had promised. For the first time in 20 years, looking at a child's drawing of a lopsided house, Kate let go. The next 2 days existed in a soft, blurry haze. Kate woke up late the next morning to an empty apartment and a note on the kitchen island. "Coffee in the pot, bagels in the bread box. Help yourself to anything. Key is under the magnet on the fridge if you need to go out. Dash is Joe." She didn't go out. She didn't even go across the hall to her own apartment for clothes. The thought of walking into that hallway, seeing the scuff marks on the polished floor where Todd had been pinned, paralyzed her. Instead, she borrowed a pair of gray sweatpants she found in the guest room dresser, likely left by a visiting family member, judging by the fit, and an oversized Washington Grays t-shirt that smelled like laundry soap. She slept. She slept with a heaviness that felt medicinal. When she wasn't sleeping, She sat in the overstuffed leather armchair in the guest room, reading the paperback novels she found on the shelves. They were escapist thrillers and fantasy epics, far removed from the medical journals that usually populated her nightstand. She learned things about Joe Russell through the archaeology of his guest room. He was a doting uncle. The artist was named Emma, according to the signatures. He came from a family that valued communication. Stacks of postcards and birthday cards were tucked into the frames of the mirror. He valued comfort over aesthetics. By the afternoon of the second day, the bruising on her neck had darkened to a violent plum color, but the swelling had gone down. Kate stood in the guest bathroom, tracing the shape of the contusion in the mirror. It was an injury. Tissue damage. Capillary burst. It would heal. She applied a cold compress, her reflection looking less like the machine of GW trauma and more like a woman who had survived something. The front door unlocked at 11:30 p.m. Kate froze in the kitchen, where she had been nursing a mug of herbal tea. She tightened the sash of the sweatpants, suddenly conscious of her intrusion. Joe walked in, dropping a heavy bag by the door with a groan that came from the bottom of his chest. He looked wrecked. His hair was wet, likely from a clubhouse shower, but he looked grimy with exhaustion. He stopped when he saw her. His eyes swept over her, the oversized shirt, the tea, the bruise on her neck. His expression softened, the fatigue momentarily held at bay. "Hey," he said softly. "You're still here." "Good." "I can leave," Kate said, the reflex immediate. "I didn't mean to." "Stop." He walked into the kitchen, moving with a stiffness that made Kate's diagnostic brain twitch. "I mean, it's good you're safe. Stay as long as you need." He opened the freezer and pulled out 2 gel ice packs. One went to the back of his neck. The other he juggled in his hand, looking at his right shoulder before sighing and putting it back. "Rough game?" Kate asked. 4 hours. Extra innings against the Braves. We lost on a bloop single in the 11th. He leaned his hip against the counter, closing his eyes for a second. Catching 14 innings makes you rethink your life choices. Kate watched him. She saw the way he held his right arm, tucked slightly inward, rotating the shoulder joint carefully as if testing a rusted hinge. "Is there any food?" he asked, opening his eyes. "I forgot to eat after the game." "I found popcorn in the pantry," Kate offered. "I can make some." Joe cracked a smile, a real one that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Popcorn is a food group. Go for it." 10 minutes later, they were sitting on the floor of the living room with a bowl of popcorn between them. The 70-inch TV was off. The city lights outside provided the only illumination. "So," Joe said, tossing a kernel into his mouth, "Dr. McCormick takes a sick day. The world must be ending." "I didn't take a sick day," Kate corrected, pulling her knees to her chest. "I took administrative leave." "There's a difference." "Right. Semantics. The tool of lawyers and politicians." He looked at her, his gaze dropping to her neck before respectfully moving back to her eyes. "How are you holding up?" "Truthfully." Kate picked at a couple of popcorn kernels. "I don't know. I'm furious. Mostly at myself." "Why?" "For not expecting a guy in a $3,000 suit to be a predator? For missing the signs. I'm trained to read people. I diagnose pathology for a living. I sat at dinner with him for 2 hours, and I just thought he was an arrogant narcissist. I didn't code him as dangerous until he was in the elevator." Joe shook his head. "Predators are good at camouflage, Kate. That's how they hunt. Don't put that on your stat sheet." He reached for the popcorn, wincing as his arm extended. The movement was subtle, a microscopic hitch in the deltoid, a quick intake of breath, but Kate caught it. "Your glenohumeral joint is inflamed," she said. It wasn't a question. Joe froze, hand halfway to the bowl. He pulled his arm back, masking the discomfort with a shrug. "Just sore. Lot of throws tonight. It's not just sore. You're guarding it." She turned fully toward him, the surgeon taking control. "I watched you walk in. You're carrying your right shoulder about an inch higher than your left to relieve pressure on the supraspinatus tendon. When you reached for the bowl, you compensated by rotating your torso instead of extending the arm." Joe stared at her. "Is there an MRI machine hidden in your eyes?" "I'm a trauma surgeon. I know biomechanics." "You're hurting." "It's August," Joe said, as if that explained everything. "Everyone hurts in August. Catchers hurt from April to October. Pain tells you to stop before something snaps. If I stop, we lose ground. We're in the hunt. Captains don't sit because they're sore." "That's a martyr complex," Kate said quietly. He leaned his head back against the sofa. "It's not martyrdom. It's responsibility. People rely on me. The pitchers. The rookies. If I'm not back there, the whole rhythm falls apart." Kate looked at him. She understood that weight. She felt it every time she scrubbed in. the knowledge that a shaky hand or a slow decision meant a family got a death notification. I get it, she said. The feeling that if you step away, the walls collapse, that you're the only structural beam holding the roof up. Joe turned his head to look at her. The playfulness was gone, replaced by recognition. Yeah, that's it, exactly. You feel that in the ER? Every day. If I'm not perfect, people die. If I take a break, the queue backs up. If I show weakness, the staff loses confidence. She gestured to the dark apartment. That's why I have all this. The control. Because if I lose control for 1 second, the chaos gets in. And the chaos is terrifying. Joe finished softly. Terrifying, she agreed. They sat in silence for a moment, two workaholics dissecting their own neuroses over salty popcorn. It was the most intimate conversation Kate had in years, and she hadn't even told him her middle name. Joe rolled his right shoulder again, a grimace flickering across his face. Okay, Kate said, shifting into practical mode. You won't sit out. I accept that premise, however medically inadvisable it is, but you can't keep throwing like that. Technique advice from a surgeon? I've got coaches for that. Coaches care about launch angles. I care about whether you're going to need a total shoulder replacement by age 40. She moved closer, her hesitation about personal space overridden by her need to fix a problem. Turn around. What? Turn your back to me. I want to check the scapular tracking. Joe hesitated, then shifted, turning his broad back toward her. Kate reached out. Her hands, cool and precise, landed on his upper back over his t-shirt. Joe tensed instantly. Relax, she ordered, her voice dropping into the commanding timbre she used in the OR. Drop your shoulders. Breathe. She palpitated the muscle, feeling the ropey tension in the traps and the rhomboids. Lift your arm. Slowly. To the side. Joe complied. At 90 degrees, she felt the hitch. The scapula winged out slightly, dragging. There, she said. You feel that catch? Yeah. Your serratus anterior is weak. It's not firing properly, so your upper traps are doing all the work to lift the arm. You're grinding the rotator cuff every time you throw, because the shoulder blade isn't clearing the space. She pressed her thumb firmly into a trigger point near his spine. Joe let out a sharp hiss of breath. Mother of. Breathe through it. She worked on the knot, her thumb digging in with practiced pressure. You're guarding the injury, which is making the mechanics worse. You're trying to muscle the throw with your arm instead of your back. Hard to use your back when it feels like it's on fire, Joe gritted out. The fire is because the muscles are locked. Listen to me. She kept working the muscle, feeling the tension begin to surrender under her hands. When you're in the squat, before you throw, you need to engage your core differently. You're dumping all the weight into your hips and arm. You need to load the thoracic spine. Thoracic loading, Joe repeated, his voice tight but listening. Interpret that for a guy who hits a ball with a stick. Twist your chest, not just your arm. Initiate the throw from your ribcage. It takes the torque off the small muscles in the shoulder and puts it on the big muscles in the trunk. She released the pressure point and smoothed her hand over the muscle. And for the love of God, stop sleeping on your right side. You're crushing the blood flow all night. Joe lowered his arm. He rolled the shoulder. The movement was smoother, the hitch less pronounced. He turned around, looking at her with a mixture of surprise and respect. That actually feels better. It's a temporary fix. You need PT to strengthen the serratus. If you change the mechanics, you might survive the season without tearing the supraspinatus. Thoracic twist, Joe muttered, pantomiming a throwing motion with his new awareness. Start from the ribs. Exactly. Use the big engine, save the little gears. Joe looked at her hands, the hands that had just dissected his throwing motion with clinical ease. You're amazing, you know that? The compliment caught Kate off guard. It wasn't the reverent awe of a resident or the polite praise of a colleague. It was simple admiration. She pulled her hands back into her lap, flushing slightly. I'm just a mechanic. The parts are different, but the leverage principles are the same. No, Joe said, his eyes locking on hers. You're not just a mechanic. You're hiding out in a stranger's apartment wearing oversized sweats because you went through hell 48 hours ago, and you're still spending your energy trying to fix me. Kate looked down at the popcorn bowl. The observations were too close to the bone. It's what I do, she whispered. If I'm fixing things, I'm not. Breaking? Joe suggested gentility. Thinking, she corrected. I'm not thinking about the hallway. Joe reached out. This time, he didn't hesitate. He placed his hand over hers, where it rested on her knee. His hand was large, calloused from the bat, warm and rough against her smooth skin. Then keep fixing me, he said. I'm a mess. My knees creak, my back is a disaster, and I can't hit a curveball to save my life right now. I'll provide plenty of distraction. Kate looked at his hand, then up at his face. He was looking at her with an openness that terrified her, yet she didn't pull her hand away. "I can't help you with the curveball," she said, a ghost of a smile returning. "But I can probably give you some exercises for the knees." Joe squeezed her hand gently, then let go, grabbing a handful of popcorn. "Deal. But first, tell me why you have a jar of crunchy peanut butter in a pantry that looks like a museum exhibit. I need to know the logic behind that." Kate laughed. It was a small, rusty sound, but it broke the tension in the room. She leaned back against the sofa, tucking her feet under her. "It's about texture," she began, and for the next hour, the trauma surgeon and the catcher sat in the dark, trading stories not of life and death or wins and losses, but of the small, stupid things that made them human. And for the first time since the attack, Kate McCormick didn't check the lock on the door.